So there are two items that we'd like to highlight this morning that will be discussed at the board tonight. The first of which is the dispersal of the cash that we have available in the Charter School Facilities Program. And some of you may remember hearing this item. I think we talked about it a little bit 2 months ago, and then it was pulled at the request of a board member. And so what we're dealing with now is the return of that item, but it's also changed a little bit. So if you were following this item, instead of dealing with the $14.2 million in cash we had available a couple months ago, we're now looking at $28.9 million in cash proceeds that are available for the board to use. And what we're looking for in this item is board direction on how they'd like to do that. So first, before I get into the options, all of this cash is from Proposition 1D. Just sort of came out that way. The cash was reserved in different accounts, and the charter schools that were not able to use it all happen to have 1D awards. So any of the cash that's used needs to go to a 1D project. The basic construct of the options that the board will be considering is similar to what was in the board books 2 months ago. And we've got 3 options for the board to consider, and they get a little detailed, so bear with me as we walk through the different steps on these. But for the first option, option 1, the board could choose to make the cash available to anyone on the unfunded list. So it would not necessarily remain within the Charter School Facilities Program. It would go towards 1D projects that have submitted a certification during this current filing period, which ends tomorrow. And it could just go down the list in date order received for those that had Prop 1D projects. Now, the second option for the board to consider would be, to give you a little history on this, in May of 2011, what the board did as a result of some of the cash management subcommittee meetings that were going on is they set aside future bond sale proceeds for the Charter School Facilities Program for the purposes of advanced site and design apportionments, fund releases, and they set aside $73.5 million. Now here's where the math gets tricky. That was the best known number at the time of what we needed for the program because some of the charter school projects had the cash available that we're talking about today, the 28.9. So if the board takes the 28.9 million and uses it for some other purpose, then if you want to cover the advanced site and design needs for the entire universe in the charter school program, the board will need to reserve additional funds out of a future bond sale to cover everybody on that list because the need is now $94.2 million instead of the original $73.5. So if the board is wanting to keep with the intent of making the program whole for that aspect of it, then additional bond sale proceeds will be needed. There are a couple different ways they could accomplish this. They could carve it out of the next bond sale proceeds as they were doing with the 73.5. Or under option 2, they could use some of the cash that they have now and basically save it until the next bond sale and use that to offset the need of the program. Now, the way the math works out on that, if they save the cash, they would only need to reserve $65.3 million out of the future bond sale proceed. So they could cover the entire universe of charter schools that have advanced site and design cash available to them through the program, but they'd have to take an action as far as putting the cash towards it. I guess the downside to saving the cash for that purpose is that it would be waiting for another bond sale proceeds to become available. And at this point, we don't have any estimates on when that's actually going to happen, so we don't know if we're talking months or a year or what the time frame is. So that is option 2, basically, would be so that you don't have to carve out as much cash from the next bond sale. And just a little more history on that. The reason the board set aside the bond sale proceeds out of the future bond was because they wanted to get this program back up on a level playing field so that the charter schools could get the seed money and get their construction projects going. So in keeping with that intent, you need to make more proceeds available. Under option 3, the board could reserve the cash for the construction construction-ready projects. There are 4 charter schools that are on the unfunded list right now. There are 4 projects. They are not at the top of the list. They're in varying places, some towards the bottom, some in the middle. And 3 of the 4 projects are funded from Proposition 1D, so all 3 of those projects could be covered. And the second project on the list is a Proposition 55 project, and last month we did have some additional bond authority become available in the charter school program. So as part of this option, the board would need to consider whether they wanted to do any sort of bond source switch to try to make this project partially out of Proposition 1D so that it could access the maximum amount of cash possible. It's not enough authority to cover the entire project, so the second project on the list would receive half of its cash and have to remain on the unfunded list for the balance. So option 3 has basically 2 considerations for the board there. If the board chooses option 3, then there would still be a balance of approximately $6.9 million in cash that is not currently needed for charter projects on the unfunded list because we only have the 4. And there is also the question that it's not going in date order received, so the board could be skipping over the 4 health and safety projects at the top of the list and potentially various other projects on the list, so that's something that they'll need to weigh into their decision tonight. So those are the 3 options. Staff is seeking direction from the board on this, and the way we've laid out the recommendations on this item, our first question basically is how does the board want to disperse the cash? And then based on how they do that, we may need them to take action on how they want to handle the balance of the need for the advanced design and site potentially out of the next bond sale, so that $20 million gap that we now have. And then we are recommending, as recommendation number 3, that once the board does make the cash available for advanced site and design, that all the apportionments, all the preliminary apportionments resume their statutory timelines at the end of the filing period for the cash, and our reasoning for that is basically the program's back to where it was, so there's no need for the freeze to be maintained on these projects because the cash would have then been available to everyone, and the four-year timeline could resume, and different projects would have varying amounts of time left to either convert or to rescind their project. So I know that's a lot of detail. I'd be happy to answer any questions on how all these moving parts are coming together on this item if anybody has any questions. Okay, I'm not seeing any questions, so we're going to move on to something a little easier here, labor compliance. So the labor compliance item that's going before the board tonight is actually a report. And it was a request of the board last month that OPSC bring back an item that details the steps that staff has taken to make sure the districts are aware of labor compliance program requirements on their projects so that folks are not caught up in a situation where to get the funding they needed to do labor compliance and they're only finding out 2 years after the fact when it may be too late to do something about it. If you were following the board, in previous months we did have some appeals that went before the board for districts that were in that exact situation, and the board was able to accommodate a switch of bond funds so that they didn't need to do a labor compliance program. However, with the Proposition 1D bond funds running out, that's not necessarily going to be an option for the board in the future. So the board wanted to make very certain that districts that receive Proposition 47, Proposition 55 funds understand that they need to follow the rules for labor compliance. So what you'll find in the item is a list of, I guess it's a history of how OPSC has been informing districts, but it's also a place that as a district you can look to be reminded or to see whether or not your project is falling under this requirement. And one of the first points of contact that you'll have with OPSC on this topic is in your 15-day letter process. So when you're submitting your funding application, there is a box that you're certifying to as far as whether or not you're required to enforce a labor compliance program. And that answer is very important. So when you're reading that box, make sure you understand what you're checking yes or no to, because that's going to help us try to match up the funds if we have any flexibility there. But in the 15-day letter that you receive, if you're getting one for any other issues, then we do remind you that you've certified that you're enforcing a labor compliance program, or there might be questions if you've not addressed that box or if something's not matching up. So that's the first point of contact that you'll have from OPSC on that. Also, when you submit your fund release, the form SAB 5005, you're going to need to provide verification that you have complied with labor compliance. So you're going to give us some copies of your contracts with the labor compliance provider. Now that is if you're a 47 or a 55 project. So if you're a 1D project, then that is not required. But if you're 47 or 55, if any part of your project is 47 or 55, we're going to be asking for those documents before we can release the funds. Now also some places you can look. We occasionally send email blasts out. We'll publish articles in our newsletters like building blocks. I think we just recently sent emails on the developments for some of the changes to labor compliance back in May. So you can look for emails from our office, but what we are working on and what you may be receiving in the next couple of weeks is an additional reminder letter. So we're going through our lists of folks that have either received an apportionment or that are on the unfunded list, and we will be sending you a letter letting you know that you either received an apportionment that uses Prop 47 or 55 funding, or that you're scheduled to receive funds from those bond sources. And we're going to send you a reminder letter to let you know that so that you can be prepared and get your labor compliance program in place. And then the other thing to look for is after you receive an approval at the board, we send our after board award letters, and there will be a paragraph explaining labor compliance on that letter as well. So take a look at those. It's not just for the file. There is some useful information in there. Please read those. And then the other thing, and I apologize, this is not going to show up very well at home, but if you are on our website, you can pull up our agenda, and on the LCP item, which is in stamp page 229, you'll find attachment A, and it's going to have some yellow highlighting on it. So when you get a chance, take a look at this agenda item, and we've made some enhancements so that it's easier to determine from your funding shell or your unfunded approval shell where your bonds are coming from. We used to have just a fund code over here, which meant something to us because the numbers matched up with the particular bond sources. But if you're not used to looking at these, if you've only done maybe one project in the last 2 years, we've tried to make it easier for you to see the proposition that your bond funds are coming from. So in the little yellow square that is under the history of project costs and apportionment, it clearly states proposition, and then it's going to give you the number. So you can look and see if it's proposition 47 or 55. And then down at the bottom, we have reminders in the special conditions that tell you that you've certified that you're doing an LCP and that you've been apportioned funds that require it. So it's another place for you to look to see if you're subject to LCP. And then the other thing is on Prop 47 and 55 projects, you get a grant amount up here, which is not something new. But if you got the labor compliance grant, you're subject to it because you got 47 and 55 funds. So we're hoping that these things will help districts be aware of the labor compliance program requirements, and we are committed to notifying you of any changes in the program. So if things start to change in the future, we'll make sure to keep folks informed. But in the meantime, if you have questions about whether or not your existing project is subject to these requirements, please contact your project managers so that we can make sure that you're aware of what you need to do and address this sooner rather than later. So again, just a report with an update and some tools and tips that might be helpful to figure out if you are subject to these requirements. Any questions on that one? Okay. So that's all that we have today. It's a full agenda. We've got several appeals and some district-related issues going on, so lots of other items going tonight, but those are the highlights. So now I believe we have DSA that's going to come up and give their updates this month. And I believe Masha Lutzuk is here for DSA.
Good morning. So, as always, a few updates on mostly our publications and meetings, and then some statistics on our project plan approval activities. So we spent the last 2 months working out the actually retooling our DSA procedure 0803, which relates to the applications for seismic mitigation program that first have to receive DSA approval. And we've posted a draft of the procedure. It's an existing document that we revamped because in reviewing it, we also realized that several items need definition. So the procedure is going to look drastically different, longer than what it was before, but the main changes that are related to the regulations that the board adopted are fairly minor. The other thing that we did is we used the template that was developed with the contract paid for the seismic safety by the Seismic Safety Commission, and we made it a mandatory evaluation template. Rather than having school districts submit custom reports to determine eligibility of their building, they will now be using the template, which will expedite our review time, and if the same structural engineer firm is preparing several of those templates, it would also shorten the length of their prep time. So that template, which is included here in my, mentioned here in my second bullet, is what we call evaluation template. We've also worked closely with California Geologic Survey and included their guidelines. And our document will also reference several items that are related to SFP regulation requirements, like the cost-benefit analysis for determination of whether a building must be replaced or rehabbed. And so tomorrow we will hold a public meeting. It will be set up like our advisory board meeting. So we will present, the main presentation will be out of Sacramento. We will have our regional offices that have fairly small conference rooms, but it's typically enough to host everyone that wants to attend in all of our 4 regional offices, and we have our structural engineer lead, Ron LaPlante, who will participate from San Diego. And then we'll have a dial-in phone number, which I believe is posted in our agenda, and I'll confirm when I get back that that's the accurate number. We'll have a dial-in phone number for people to listen, and those that will want to participate by phone will also, in the beginning of the meeting, announce an email address where questions can be sent. So my plan is to have written questions come in from those that listen to the meeting and verbal questions from those that attend either in Sacramento, at DSA headquarters, or one of the regional offices. So that's the update on the meeting tomorrow from 1 to 3:30. Are there any questions on this subject? Okay. Maybe you'll have some tomorrow. And there's an update on our project for PC approvals. This goes back to a subject I covered earlier this year. Lots of school districts utilize, and their design professionals utilize these pre-check designs, which are common structures, shade structures, scoreboards, and relocatable buildings. They go through a pre-check process where a manufacturer submits the design, their template design, for us to review. And once we stamp approve it, that design can be used, incorporated into a school project. And because it's already been pre-checked, it could typically be done in an over-the-counter review, which is a 2-hour appointment where the whole project can get checked and stamped out in 2 hours. And since the building code changed and the main building code was in effect on January 1st of this year, all these pre-check designs had to be renewed. And we had originally proposed a June 1st, or maybe it was a September 30th deadline, to get all those pre-check designs reviewed and approved and for school districts to start using it. We did not fit all of our policy development into the timeline that we proposed, so we're extending the deadline till December 31st. So that means school districts can still use the 2007 pre-check designs and submit those and use those for over-the-counter approvals. But then after January 1st, on or after January 1st, all those 2010 pre-check designs should be ready and must be submitted as part of the project. So the details are contained in our bulletin 0702. We had to also update some of our policies and procedures that are, there are several documents that are related to relocatable classroom approval, over-the-counter, pre-check design, and they're separate documents, but they all interrelate in some way, shape, or form. So we've had to update, and some procedures we revamped them in their entirety because we noticed that they could benefit from better organization, clear language. So policy 0702 has been, I believe, revised in its entirety. Our IR 16.1 has been revised in its entirety, and these have been recently published on our website, end of July, early August. Their main changes really are related to our, we used to have a deferral system for sprinkler system approvals, and that's no longer the case. So now the challenge is to, for many campuses that require an automatic sprinkler system, even for a relocatable classroom program, for a relocatable classroom, mixing up my terms, is to submit a pre-check design that contains a sprinkler system that contains all the parameters for tying it into the existing sprinkler system at the campus and do it over the counter in 2 hours. There's some challenges there, and so we took a conservative approach and drafted our over-the-counter policy to restrict the number of buildings in an application that includes a sprinkler system and only allow one site to be reviewed. And then as time goes by and we and the design professionals get more proficient in reviewing these sprinkler designs quickly, then we can revisit the policy and determine if we can be more flexible. But right now, that's one of the major changes that we had to incorporate is restrictions due to these sprinkler system designs that need to be reviewed and approved with the main project, and they cannot be deferred. And there are also some requirements, new requirements that I wanted to highlight in addition to other little changes that are in these documents, and that's for the Green Code. The Green Code is imposing different requirements on new campuses that are submitted to DSA for plan review after January 1st of this year versus old campuses. So now if there's a relocatable classroom that is being proposed for placement at a new campus, it has to have certain features like low emitting materials and some higher energy standards. So it's important for districts and design professionals to know that the new portables that are coming off the new manufacturer's plant placed on these campuses will have new requirements, but they're also then related to the new requirement also impacts how districts can move relocatables back and forth between campuses. So we've highlighted those two issues and, like I said, made additional clarifications in these documents. And of course, if you have any questions, we direct questions mainly to the regional offices, but if your question is kind of more of a global nature and may impact multiple projects, you can direct those to me. So that's a quick update there. And again, I'm just highlighting these documents here and drawing your attention to them because you'd actually, if they matter to the projects that you're working on, it's best to review those in detail and then ask us the questions in a follow-up email or phone call. Any questions on that? All right. And then the last update is from our fire life safety team. And this is, again, some updated publications. There's a document we have on our website. It's nicely laid out, and it's got pictures and graphs and charts, and it's called Security versus Existing Guidelines, Door Locking Hardware in Schools, and it tries to tie all the requirements of the building code and fire code in one document as a guideline for school districts to know how to design the door locking hardware. And I think last time I demonstrated one of the new lock requirements, and so we've updated this document to reflect those new requirements that are in AB 211, and then we also updated it for some 2010 building code provisions. And then recently we also issued a new bulletin. It's also a guideline type of publication. We got a phone call from a local jurisdiction, and they were referencing this old document, Fire Apparatus Access. We finally found a copy in our office. It's a very old document, but it was used apparently by local jurisdictions to guide them in their review of relocatable structures and what fire provisions applied to those structures. We noticed the document was outdated. We talked to the state fire marshal, conferred with them that the requirements are out of date, and then we provided this bulletin to let folks know that to not use this paper if you've got an old copy of it somewhere. I believe it goes back to 1990s. And then use these documents instead that we have, which are our fire sprinkler guidelines, fire alarm guidelines instead. So again, very important to use the documents that are posted on our website as guidelines, and anything that has a DSA name on it and is hanging around the office but is no longer on our website probably means the document's been removed, out of date, no longer used, etc. So that's the updates from Fire Life Safety Team. And then hopefully next time I attend this meeting, I'll be able to provide you some updates from our Access team because there's some important changes in our access code requirements. There's federal IDA standards, new ones coming, going into effect in March of next year, and we are doing a lot of work in our office, and hopefully I'll be able to share some details with you next time. And other updates from DSA, as always, are bin times, which, other than a few flukes like fire life safety projects in San Diego, that workload is staying heavy. We're doing pretty well in all other categories and disciplines of staying under our target 6-week bin time. And these statistics are provided just, they're staying fairly stable as far as our average processing days. And as always, we show processing dates for projects in total, by DSA and by design professional. Orange box is DSA bin time days. Red is DSA plan review days, and green is DSA professional correction days. And the blue boxes in the end are back check and stamp out. We are again providing information by 5 categories of projects, which is access only, over the counter, which are those that I've reported on. And again, over the counter is meant to be a 1-day process. However, some projects need to go back and get corrected, and then they schedule another over the counter appointment, and that's why the total processing days or average is 12 days. Our smaller projects under $1 million, an average processing days in total 135. Between $1 million and $5 million is 190. And then our longest processing is, of course, for our larger projects, which sometimes even have to be split up between multiple plan reviewers for the same discipline because they're so large. Those are about 232 days. The majority of those projects, the larger ones, do come from the community colleges that typically contain multi-story large facilities. And our average processing days has been staying very stable, about the same, 98, 99 days. And that's the end of my update. And if there are any questions for me, I'll take them now. All right, then I'll pass the microphone to Fred Yeager. I almost escaped. Come on.
Can you put that chart back up for a second?
Which one of them? The last one?
Right there is fine. I just need an explanation. I'm looking at DSA bin time day.
Mm-hmm.
It says access is 29, 34, 40, 44. I see 4 numbers over 30 and 1 number under 30, and yet the average processing time is 22. Can you explain to me how that works? If you have most of your bin times are over 29 is the smallest out of the MCC. If that is a simple function of taking those 5 numbers, adding them up and dividing by 5, that's a tremendously skewed average.
Right, and that's why we present our, this is really, that's why in my presentation I focused on breaking it down by categories because these are drastically different. Over the counter has really no bin time, and it does skew the numbers. So if that's, but again, these charts are used generically by us, and different folks want to know different statistics. So we present it in different formats just to provide to display the information in all ways. But that over the counter will skew the numbers always.
But if you use the weighted average, that wouldn't happen. I mean, it really is a disservice to say that your average processing time is 22 days when it's really more like 30 or higher. Once you see one project comes in, whatever, one day.
I'll agree with that, but I guess it all depends on what you're focused on. And like I said, we receive lots of questions, not just from school districts interested in a particular type of review, but others like, our current, it could be anyone from auditors to legislators to DGS leadership wanting statistics from us, and oftentimes they're interested in the plain average. So we do provide all this information.
Of your average processing time. I would really object to it. Thank you. That's all.
Okay.
Good morning. We'll talk about a few things today. Should be quick. Superintendent Torlakson, when he took office, established a 59-member transition team to advise him on a number of items. Their report, a blueprint for great schools, has been released. It's on our webpage and provides recommendations in several areas to advance the needs for 21st learning, meeting the needs of the whole child, and rebuilding the ranks of California's teachers with resources and respect. Here's the 8 subgroups and the web page if you want to access the report. Okay. You can see the last one is facilities construction reform. We'll talk a little bit more about that one. Chaired by Cesar Diaz, and you can see some of the members there. Cruz Bustamante, former Lieutenant Governor Ted Dutton. And here are their key recommendations. You can see the highlight there, and I'll give you the full verbiage. Collaborate with the governor to consolidate or better coordinate agencies that have responsibility for facilities design and approval to streamline the process of developing facilities. You can see some parallels there with recommendations that came out of the expert working group and others. The second one is to inventory facilities as the basis for a multi-year needs-based facilities plan. Establish a facility condition index that considers utilization, educational suitability, building condition, and technology readiness to determine priorities and investment levels. Okay? Again, parallel with some other recommendations made by legislative analysts and others over the years. Third one is to enable districts to engage in more efficient facilities construction and redesign, including movement toward energy self-sufficiency by setting targets for energy goals and providing information for LEAs, local educational agencies, to use to determine the most effective options for designing, building, and modernizing school facilities. Fourth one is establish a Superintendent's Council of Business Labor to develop procurement criteria and to provide opportunities for procurement that promotes supplier diversity. The last one is to foster joint use agreements that support schools as community hubs and create efficiencies with other community service providers. So you can read the detail behind that in the report. Now, this was a group brought together by the superintendent to advise him, and so future actions may come out of these recommendations, so stay tuned for that. Now, previously I talked about the Schools of the Future initiative, which is different than the Transition Advisory Team. Talked about a lot of the same things. That report will be released in early, let's just say September. So we'll give you more information on that as we know the release date. And just review that these were advisory panels convened by Superintendent Torlakson looking at 2 general areas, high-performance schools with these subtopics, and school facility program reform subcommittee with those topics. Okay. We did hold a technical advisory group of pipeline analysts to look at our protocol, our 2007 protocol, to see if there's any changes that are necessary based on new information, some of the fallout of San Bruno. We held that, and our next step is to take that information and convene a policy advisory group. And that would be people who now would take this report from the pipeline analyst who does all the heavy math, and how would a decision maker best be able to use and understand this information in making siting locations. So we're going to put together that group. All right. That'll be happening here in the next few months. You can contact me if you have any interest in that. Some organization news. Talked about the superintendent's transition team and the whole child, 21st century learning. The department is being realigned, our resources to better attack those concerns. So as of effective October 1st, 2011, our unit will be renamed to School Facilities Services Division, and we will be moved to a different branch. A branch is a collection of divisions within the department, and our new deputy will be Jeannie Oropeza. Right now we're current under Dr. William Ellerby. Right? So that's October 1st. And as of August 31st, retirement of Barbie Ross. Several of you probably worked with Barbie over the last year or so. Will be retiring. She's an education program consultant with us, working on the interaction of programming and facilities design. So I think that's all I have today. So any questions for me? Going once, Lyle? Okay. Anything in general for anybody? Guess we're done.